Good morning, everybody. My name is Daniel Gorfine. I'm the Director of Financial Markets Policy and Legal Counsel at the Milken Institute. Welcome everybody here to our panel today, Crowdfunding for Startups and Small Businesses. By the end of today's session, we hope that all of you have a good feel and understanding of the landscape of securities crowdfunding and its potential impact on capital markets. We have here an incredible array of innovative minds that are hoping to disrupt the way that startups and small businesses raise capital and how capital flows to those companies. I would argue that in order for an innovative disruption to have a real impact on the marketplace, three elements are required. First, there needs to be a societal need or a problem. Second, there needs to be a new technology or process that can solve that need or problem. And third, there needs to be a cultural willingness or receptivity to trying something new. With crowdfunding, I think all three elements are in place. As far as the need, since the Great Recession, startups and small businesses have struggled to access capital. Credit is tight, and traditional early-stage equity investors are increasingly risk-averse. 70% of all companies are financing their growth with credit cards, home equity loans, and personal and family savings. Second, in terms of the technology, we've seen with advances in information technology and new open networks, most notably marked by the internet, the increasing decentralization and democratization of financial markets. You can think of it as an evolutionary process that began in the mid-1990s with online discount brokers that were able to leverage technology in order to offer services to more investors at a lower price. Third, in terms of cultural receptivity, in the past decade, you've seen around the world incredible receptivity to the idea of online community. And a lot of that is done through social media, where people can share thoughts and ideas. And actually, with non-financial return crowdfunding, which is already underway in the United States, we've seen companies and projects able to raise thousands or even millions of dollars. So with all of this context, in 2012, Congress tried to harness some of this by passing in overwhelming bipartisan fashion the Jobs Act. The Jobs Act, for the first time, will legalize securities crowdfunding and change important rules related to private capital markets. So our panelists today, most of them being crowdfunding portal founders or creators, are hoping to leverage the Jobs Act in order to offer new opportunities to businesses and to investors. So represented here, I'm going to actually point to my left here, is Chris Brummer. He is our lawyer. He is the Milken Institute Senior Fellow and a Georgetown Law Professor. Then we have Candace Klein, who is the founder of SomoLend. Ben Miller, who is the co-founder of Fundrise. We have Nivi, who is one of the founders of AngelList. And we have Danae Ringelman, who is one of the co-founders of Indiegogo. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris. Chris, can you explain to everybody what did the Jobs Act do? What does the Jobs Act do? How has it changed securities laws in the U.S.?
Well, absolutely. It's great to be here. It's always very intimidating when you have such exciting people doing exciting things and you're introduced as the lawyer. But I will nonetheless keep it brief because it is important. How the law works with entrepreneurs is important with regards to capital accumulation and how we drive the economy forward. The Jobs Act works in a variety of ways in the crowdfunding space. I guess we're all pretty familiar with it, but it's the opportunity to pool money together using small contributions to support achieving a specific goal. These key characteristics of crowdfunding were largely confined to the spaces of perks or some kind of benefit with regards to receiving an early copy of a book or a tape or a video game or an application. But as investors and the investor community has become more aware of the possibility that crowdfunding provides, there has been heightened interest with regards to both equities and debt crowdfunding, and this has triggered a range of regulatory concerns as well as regulatory innovations. As a securities law professor, I always tell my students securities laws are about information. It's about a process that you have to take in order to access capital markets, and it's about potentially liability. The Jobs Act affects each one of those. If we could just turn to slide 1 as to what exactly is the Jobs Act. It basically says if you are a company and you're looking to raise money, you can raise up to $1 million. from a variety of investors. But these investors will be subject to some, let's call them prudential investor protections. Effectively, if you earn $100,000 or less, you can invest $2,000 or 5% of your income, whichever is greater. And for those investors whose net worth is over $100,000, you can invest up to 10% of their annual income. And by allowing investors to invest this way, you are able to raise money without necessarily having to go through the same Section 5 onerous registration requirements that's normally associated with a public offering. If we can go to slide 2. Instead of the typical offering memorandum that's required, you do have to disclose certain basic aspects about your business, about your directors and the like with the SEC, but your financial disclosures are limited. Instead, if you're only seeking to raise up to $100,000, all you have to include is a recent income tax return, $100,000 to $500,000. You have financial statements that have to be reviewed by an independent public accountant, and only if you're looking to hit the jackpot with over $500,000 are you required to offer audited financial statements. Nonetheless, crowdfunding is still very much in the works, and there is a significant degree of rulemaking that is still left. If you go to slide number 3, the Jobs Act has 2 titles, if one will, that are of particular importance for folks looking to raise money and who are looking for a bit more certainty with regards to how this new crowdfunding process will work, both Title III and Title II. I'll start with Title III. Title III affects your, we'll call it retail crowdfunding space. It involves some of the rules that I've highlighted in the previous 2 slides, but there are real questions that are still open. Many of the questions involve not so much the role of the investor, but instead the crowdfunding portal. In short, crowdfunding takes place either through a broker-dealer that is registered or an exempted portal. How those portals, which is a relatively new regulatory innovation, will work is still up for grabs. We don't really know what will be required of them, but we do know what they are not permitted to do. They're not permitted to provide investment advice or recommendations, which itself has a variety of implications that we'll need to discuss, I think. We're not exactly sure as to the scope of investor education that a portal would be required to provide for investors, but we do know that they are not allowed themselves to solicit investment, and they're not, again, permitted to provide investment advice. And then in Title II is what's really, really interesting for many of those here in the room, as well as here on the panel, involves less retail and more private investment spaces. That is, how can you raise money through a crowdfunding portal or broker-dealer in ways that potentially allow you to avoid a general ban on solicitation. General solicitation ban has been in place particularly with 506 Reg D private transactions, but the SEC has been working towards eliminating this ban. Indeed, just today, Mary Jo White has expressed her public approval for moving forward rather expeditiously with regards to lifting this general solicitation ban. And what's important about this is that it allows issuers to take advantage of the scalability of the internet. That is, that they will be able to solicit investments from accredited investors in a way that would be ordinarily not permitted. And as a result, you can ramp up pretty quickly, and particularly in the Reg D space, there would be no $1 million limit with regards to the amount of money that you can raise. So this potentially transforms the crowdfunding space. and it presents a number of very interesting market as well as regulatory issues.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. So what we're going to do now, and as we go along, we'll try to distinguish between these different models, this Title III model aimed at the general public as well as the Title II accredited investor model. But first, let me turn to Candace. Candace, when people talk about securities crowdfunding, they tend to immediately think equity. Yet we've seen across the world where crowdfunding is actually legal already, that debt seems to be outpacing equity as a model. Can you explain a little bit to the audience what debt crowdfunding means and what you're trying to do in terms of accessing that market?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm very excited to be sitting next to such amazing people who are all doing great things in their own spaces. So, SoMoLend, my company, stands for Social Mobile Local Lending, and we have and always will be a debt-based crowdfunding platform. We started when I came up with the idea for SoMoLend. It was on the heels of Prosper and Lending Club, who are in the consumer lending space, doing consumer loans. And I thought, there should be something like this in the commercial space. I got my start defending Prosper Marketplace when they ran into issues with the SEC and learned very much about their business model and thought, there is a way to do this. When we started working with Congressman McHenry, Senators Merkley, Bennett, and Brown, equity-based crowdfunding is all that you read about in the newspapers, is all that you heard about on television. That's not what is stated in the Jobs Act. The Jobs Act affects all securities-based crowd investing, which includes debt, equity, and everything in between. Before talking about what happens in other countries, I think it's interesting just to look at the size of the market in the United States. The debt market today is 4 times the size of the equity market. It's a much larger space. Yet there are only 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 platforms who are purporting to address this issue. Second, in the UK particularly, in Germany and in England, there are 2 companies, Oxmoney and Funding Circle, who've been doing debt-based crowdfunding now for several years. I believe that Funding Circle will be doing €100 million in transactions this year. Compare that to Australia, to the Australian Single Standard Offering Board, ASOB, who's been doing equity-based crowdfunding for the same period of time. Now, with ASOB, the companies that are still thriving and in business today, 5 years later after taking investment, the percentage is about 85%. Compare that to the debt market. And in the debt market, we don't necessarily know how many of the businesses are still in business. We just know that the default rates in the UK are below 1.8%, better than the default rates with banks in the US. And so this tells us that there's really something to be looking at. It's worth paying attention to. It's a big market, it's a consistently growing market, and it's one that's maintained low default rates in other countries.
Excellent. Thank you, Candace. We'll turn to Ben. Ben, I think you guys may be the first group in the country that's actually successfully done an equity crowdfund to the general public, and you'll explain how you did that legally. But what was the problem you were trying to solve for? How did you end up pursuing that model?
So my background, I'm a real estate developer. I have done large-scale real estate development in Washington, D.C. And we're partners with AFL-CIO, Mass Mutual, Angelo Gordon. So we were doing large, $100 million, $200 million developments. And the problem we were having is that in the neighborhoods where the growth is, the millennials are driving growth in cities around the country, my institutional capital partners didn't understand those neighborhoods. They really didn't have any relationship to what was happening there. They didn't live there. They weren't from there. There was a big disconnect or inefficiency in who owned this real estate, who was investing in it, and what was happening in these neighborhoods. So in 2009, we were buying a property, and we decided that we would raise money from the people, from the neighborhood, from the local people, from young people, rather than from institutional capital. And we ended up filing something called Regulation A offering. It's a direct public offering filed with the SEC. We got qualified by the SEC and registered by the states. So basically allowed us to do in fact, a public offering where anybody could invest. People were buying shares of real estate online for $100. And we've done now a number of public offerings. The first one took me 3 months to raise $325,000 from 175 people. At the end of that, I was like, this is very frustrating. This is not worth it. By the 5th deal, we had $300,000 in 2 hours. So you can see how internet basically moves geometrically, and and in DC, I meet people all the time, all over the city. Hey, I own some of your real estate. I'm partners with you. I can't believe that the city builds me. Now I can build the city. So you're really seeing a shift. I think it's going to fundamentally change real estate development, real estate ownership, when communities that are being affected by development can be part of that process, part of the ownership, part of the profit making. It really changes the power dynamics. And so as a result, we've seen actually, after we did it, first real estate companies were skeptical that we were doing this, and now we've seen large-scale adoption by huge real estate companies. 4 cities partnered with us. I don't know if you guys know MRP in DC. We have developers in LA, in Brooklyn. So, and they're doing this because they recognize that they want to be close to the communities, close to their customers. The closer you are to your customer, great retailers know that you want to be as close to your customer as possible, and this lets you basically really partner with communities. We've seen huge benefits from that. So it's a big shift, and I think it's not how people think about crowdfunding, but for real estate, it's going to be a dramatic change in how real estate's owned and built.
Great. And actually, so before we move on, I just want to ask you and Candace, so with both a debt model and an equity model, it seems like you are targeting local investors. Is that something that you think is going to be pervasive with securities crowdfunding? Will it be largely local targeted? Or do you see it going national in terms of investors being across country investing in something?
In the deals that we've been doing on SomoLend, we actually are about a year old with our technology, and we started off with 43 banks lending on our platform, including KeyBank, Fifth Third, and others. And so we were operating under a complete exemption from securities laws because banks were the lenders. Now that we've rolled it out, we are operating under different exemptions. We're not doing Reg A offerings. We're actually doing friends and family offerings under sections 4.2 and 4.1A of the Securities Act, and accredited investor offerings under section 506. And what we've learned is that when there is an individual lending to one of our borrowers, who are typically retailers, restaurants, salons, gyms, brick and mortar consumer-facing businesses use our platform. What we've learned is that the lenders typically have 1 to 2 degrees of separation from the borrower. Now that's by design and by law. Right now they'd have to in order to make an investment, but we aren't yet seeing it. So there is a very close geographic or niche connection between our lenders and borrowers.
Yeah, I get this all the time because I'm working with a lot of governments now. District of Columbia government, Washington, D.C. government partnered with us to actually crowdfund a public property. And they like the idea of having citizens, local voters, be a co-investment partner in the real estate. And they were very worried about where the investors were coming from. And I always tell everybody when I talk to them about this that if I said to you, do you want to invest in Des Moines? You wouldn't know what I'm talking about. If you want to invest, in Manhattan or in DuPont Circle, someplace that's actually a place you live near, it's relevant to you. You would say, oh, that's interesting to me. If I could say, you want to invest in Santa Monica? Oh, maybe you want to invest in, Fresno. If you don't live in Fresno, probably not. So it's really, it's inherently how people think about investing, and I don't make it exclusive. Some of my regs require me to make it. I can only sell where we've registered in the states we've registered, but it's just not how people think about investing in real estate. It's inherently a local understanding how you want to put your money to work.
Interesting, thanks. So, Nivi, AngelList came at this from a slightly different angle. AngelList is one of the first platforms or portals that tried to match accredited investors with entrepreneurs, and you've built that kind of meeting place. Can you talk a little bit about the experience that AngelList has had so far, and what you think Title II of the Jobs Act is going to mean for AngelList, lifting this ban on general solicitation? How does that potentially change your model?
Sure. I'll tell you guys a little bit about AngelList as well. Like Daniel said, it's like a dating site for investors and entrepreneurs. You create a profile for your startup, and investors knock on your door and say, I want to meet you. And you take that meeting offline, and investors decide if they want to invest in your company. We matchmake about 10 to 15 million bucks a month that way, where the investment happens offline. And it's nice for startups because all the best investors are on there, the best VCs, the best angels, the best seed funds. So it's a great place to meet them. And the old-fashioned way is to walk down the street on Sand Hill Row and try to get meetings, which sucks. So this is more of an online. It is online. So we have a new product as well that lets investors come and just invest in startups all online as long as you're accredited. And the deal flow is really nice in that you get to co-invest with Andreessen Horowitz, or you can co-invest with Founders Fund, which is Peter Thiel's fund, or you can co-invest with Mark Cuban. So it's super high quality deal flow. It's the best in the world. At the same time, we tell everybody who invests, startups are not a good place. Technology startups are not a good place to invest your money. Don't do this unless you can lose it all. So we're probably the only, I don't know, equity platform where we tell investors that they should expect to lose all their money if they use it. So to answer your question about Title II, I don't know if I have anything that specific to say about it other than it's going to be awesome. So, I mean, the big issue right now is that you can't get your friends to promote your startup, right? So what Title II is going to let you do, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is it will let you just promote your startup on Twitter, on the front page of the New York Times if you want, and tell the world that you're raising money as long as you only take money from accredited investors, from rich people. And as long as you verify that they're accredited, probably in a more stringent way than they currently, that startups currently verify that the guy is or girl is accredited, right? So right now I can't get my friend to promote me on Twitter. I can't take out an ad if I don't know if you're going to be able to take out an ad. Can you take out an ad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
any form of
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, paid placement. Okay. So like even on AngelList where everything is online, it's all kind of done in secret. If you're not signed up as an investor right now, you can't go and see which startups are raising money. So it's not really taking full advantage of the internet. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
You have some lawyers on record now telling you that.
It's okay.
But go ahead, Chris. Did you want to jump in?
I wanted to just make a note of two things. Part of the recent reforms are not only in the Reg D space, but as we've also heard, although I guess your Reg A offering was under the old regime as opposed to the new Reg A plus regime. Effectively now investors are being equipped with more arrows, if one will, with regards to how you go about raising money. Under the old Reg A, which was not actually used very often, you had some real limitations with regards to how much money you could raise, I think up to $5 million. Now you have up to $50 million that can be raised. No general solicitation ban, and also your shares or that you raise, the money that you raise are not subject to any restrictions. So the new Reg A plus space, when combined with a portal or crowdfunding strategy, is going to be able to raise unprecedented amounts of money, and that may end up becoming more popular even than your 506. But the problem is with regards to the actual implementation. There's a work stream, and what they call Reg A plus now is a bit further off in the future, and we'll see how it ends up working out in practice.
And before I turn to Danae, the one downside though with Reg A and even with the new Reg A plus is that it doesn't preempt the state law requirements. Right. So that's still a very expensive regulatory component. Ben had to register with state regulators, and that hasn't changed yet under the existing law, but perhaps that's Jobs Act 2.0. So Danae, let me turn to you. You are the co-founder of Indiegogo. It's one of the world's largest non-financial return platforms. So you've been doing this now for a number of years. Hundreds of millions of dollars has been raised through the site. What have you learned about the entrepreneurs that are seeking capital, the donors or the contributors who are coming onto the platform, and how might that inform securities crowdfunding when that does go live?
Yeah, sure. Before we jump into that, I'd actually like to get a good feel of who's in the audience. Do you mind everybody raising your hand? Who here is an investor, kind of asset manager? A few people. Lawyers? Oh, not so many lawyers. Who here is potentially thinking about using crowdfunding to raise money for a business? Interesting. Also, now raise your hand if you've actually ever funded something in crowdfunding. All right, that's the homework for the rest of you in the audience. If you really want to understand crowdfunding, go find one of our platforms and go make an investment, make a contribution, make a loan. You'll learn far more than probably what we can share with you up here today, because it's very different and it's new and it's incredibly exciting and it's changing the world. Okay, so that's my little spiel. So Indiegogo, just real quick, is, as you mentioned, the largest global crowdfunding platform that's non-financial return oriented. We call it perks based. What it means, anybody can create a campaign, go up to raise money for a small business, for a venture-backed potential company, for a charity, a cause, an artist, a film, musician. We have everything. We had a baby crowdfunded on Indiegogo last year. Couple could not afford IVF, and so they went online, created a campaign, and raised the $8,000 they needed to pay for IVF treatment. And the baby was born healthy and happy a couple months ago. So crowdfunding is, we're in 200 countries, millions every week that we're distributing. It's pretty much everywhere. It's pervasive. And the simplicity of it is that it's taking advantage of the trends that have happened over the last few years, where we're increasingly becoming more social online, sharing things with our friends, and online payments has become ubiquitous. So now people are paying for stuff online. And so what we did 5 years ago, before the word crowdfunding even existed, is we just put all that together and gave a place for people to pitch their ideas, share it with all their friends, make it very social so that you can extend it beyond just your inner circle, but to your friends and friends, and therefore raise more money from more people than otherwise possible. All with the framework of perks, which is you offering for $5 a thank you note, or $20 a DVD if you're actually making a film, or for $100 an invite to a party, or something like that. So it's really an engagement tool that small businesses or charities or artists can use to actually reach out to their crowd and engage them and help them bring an idea to life. We started this actually because I was a child of two small business owners who for 30 years can never get a loan to run their brick and mortar business, no matter what they did. And in the venture world, we call that bootstrapping. And the concept of bootstrapping for 30 years is ridiculous, but that's pretty much America, and that's pretty much the world. That's what you have to do when you don't have the right connections, when you don't have a trust fund, when you don't know an investment banker, when you don't have the ability to buy a ticket to Milton Institute. You're locked out of the system. And so we started Indiegogo to democratize fundraising and create an equal opportunity for people to get their ideas to life, where success was based on how hard they worked and how much their community and audience and customers cared to bring that idea to life, not based on if they had a lucky connection to a bank or an investor, et cetera. So now we launched, it's been 5 years, and we're growing, and what we've learned is that there's 4 reasons people fund anything, anywhere in the world. And 3 of them are happening on Indiegogo right now. The first, we call them the 4 Ps. The first is passion. And that's people just wanting to support the person or the project because they want to do good. Second is participation. They want to participate in something greater than themselves. A good example of this is there is a product called the Drink Savvy, which was a cup that changes color when a rape drug has been added to it. And one day I woke up and I saw on my Facebook, and my sister had been blasting the crap out of this campaign. And they were raising money to do an initial launch of the first run of this production of this cup. And I asked her, why are you funding this? You're a mom, you don't go to bars anymore. Why do you want this cup to be out there? And she's like, well, you know how passionate I am about domestic or violence against women issues. I want every bar to have this cup. I want every bar to force people to use these cups. And me funding this campaign and sharing it is my way to help that happen. And the third reason is perks. So sometimes people fund something just because they want the perk. We had a campaign that was this campaign called the Robot Dragonfly. It raised $1.1 million a few months ago. And it was a little drone that flies around that you can control via remote control and has video on it. It's a total toy. Apparently lots of people wanted it because over $1 million of funding came in for it. And so the large reason they funded that was to actually get the perk in return. And so the fourth reason that people fund, which has been illegal up until April 5th last year, was equity or a profit. So the 4th P is profit, which is getting an investment in return. And so what we're finding is that on Indiegogo, there's typically a dynamic mix of the first 3 at play. You're funding something because you want to support it, but you also want the perk, but it makes you sound cool at the water cooler when you're talking to your friends that you're now a producer of a film, or you just made sure that the coffee shop in your local neighborhood is getting opened. So there's a lot of mixing going on. And so with profit coming, which we're excited about because it's completely in line with our vision of democratizing fundraising and truly creating this level playing field, is we expect that when profit gets added, there will still be a dynamic mix of the 4 reasons people fund. So, maybe you invest in that local dry cleaners or that local coffee shop instead of just funding it, and instead of getting, for a $100 contribution, instead of getting $200 worth of coffee over the next 6 months, maybe you'll actually get a piece of that coffee shop. But still, the dynamic there is that you want the coffee shop to exist. You want coffee for life. You know your neighbors. You know that the people around you love caffeine, and they're gonna, frequent it. So, but you know the owner too, maybe, and so you want him to succeed. So there's a lot of dynamicism, is that a word? Happening happening when somebody funds, because it's not just purely selfish or purely ROI based, specifically in perks based right now, and I don't see that changing a whole bunch when profit gets added to the mix.
Okay, so the Jobs Act marks very significant change to securities laws. We hear a lot of questions asked about fraud. Chris, can you walk us through a little bit, what does the Jobs Act try to do to defend against or mitigate the risk of fraud? And do you think the law is on the mark?
This is the perennial cheese attracts rats problem. Obviously, to the extent to which crowdfunding becomes more popular, there are going to be more concerns for fraud. And I think it can't be emphasized enough that what the industry will have to do for its own long-term survival is to act as proactively as possible, both to prevent sort of embarrassing dilemmas, and also to have a track record to be able to respond to the inevitable bad actor who ends up working your way into your system. The current Jobs Act really doesn't say too much besides the fact that portals are required to tell investors that they can lose all of their money, which is always very, very useful. And they themselves are, for the most part, not given many responsibilities besides ensuring that the investors themselves are not going beyond the limits that I spelled out for you in that first slide. I personally think that we can do more. I think that portals, as the SEC or FINRA and other organizations that go about the rulemaking process, I think there are lots of really interesting things that you can do to empower portals in particular to work in ways that can promote investor protection. Suppose, I think it's good to think about what are the limitations that are currently in effect for portals that are not yet registered as broker-dealers. Suppose if you're a portal and what you want to do is tell outside investors that certain entrepreneurs have perhaps taken financial literacy courses. In other words, to provide a kind of signal to the outside world that some of the entrepreneurs who are raising money know how to read a cash flow statement. That could trigger certain kinds of consequences that would require that portal to register as a broker-dealer, for example. Even though that could be very useful nuggets of information, it could be deemed to be effectively providing investment advice of some sort or another. Suppose you wanted to provide some kind of certification to outside investors that different entrepreneurs went above and beyond the SEC requirements with regards to their own disclosures to the portal. This too could trigger certain kinds of consequences that could require it to register. The second a portal has to register as a broker-dealer, it changes the nature of the portal, and it changes the nature of the crowdfunding venture, because there are certain kinds of costs that are now going to be incurred. And it could easily shift that portal from looking at your retail space and moving to the accredited investor space. My own personal opinion is that crowdfunding should be an industry that offers different kinds of investments, different kinds of opportunities, but one that ultimately seeks to hold on to its aspirations of fully democratizing the access to capital, as well as democratizing the opportunities for people who want to invest in their local communities or in businesses. And I think part of that mission will require being creative about what we expect our portals to be able to do and what we expect the broker-dealers to be able to do. And as we go through the rulemaking process, I think that the portals are going to have to work very hard with regulators, but also with the entrepreneurs themselves, to provide and to work on a track record to minimize, again, fraud. And I know that there are in-house algorithms that are used to detect fraud. I know that the delinquency on different loans is very low, but I think there will be some kind of vigilance that is ultimately required.
Well, I suspect that the rest of our panelists are going to have a few comments on this. Let me start with Candace and specifically talking a little bit about how debt might have different requirements here.
Sure. Well, and first, I think there's an interesting organization for each of you to be aware of. I'm the chairperson of a group called the Crowdfund Intermediary Regulatory Advocates, CIFRA. And we have a website, cfira.org. We've actually put together several public comment letters on a number of the issues tied to the Jobs Act, on what we think should be regulated and what should not, what should be left to free market, allowing enterprises to compete with one another. I do think from a protecting the investor perspective, there are a few more things that are in the Jobs Act, and that's the pooling of information. So every owner, officer, and director is going to have a criminal background check, a credit check, a securities check that's required of the portals to provide that information and transparency. And then, there are things that different portals are doing differently. One of the things that we realized, we've had several thousand borrowers now on our platform, and we had a real issue with financial statements. We're dealing with a lot of, like I mentioned, restaurants, and they were bringing in boxes of receipts to our office, and we said, what can we do with this? And so what we've now learned is that we've developed an API with Intuit, with QuickBooks, so that we can pull those financials automatically. That also allows us to pull and update financials. So if someone is not being as honest, we'll know. And so something to think about with that is what portals can be doing to protect the investors above and beyond what is required by law.
Great. And Danae, I'm going to actually turn to you because I heard the mention of algorithms, and Indiegogo has boasted that there's zero fraud on the platform, or maybe I think minimal fraud on the platform. So can you explain a little bit about this secret sauce that we've heard about?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because a lot of people are saying the big risk here to crowdfunding is the fraud issue, and so our response is that fraud issue or risk has existed for us for the last 6 years since we first started. I remember a moment when we were literally launching the platform, and I had a freak out moment with my co-founder saying, what if somebody tries to use our platform to steal money? And so what we did about it is not because of any law that was ever written or any legal requirement. We just put our entrepreneurial hats on and said, well, what can we do to mitigate fraud or risk? Because we want to stay in business and we want to keep our site safe and clean for our customers. And the moment we have fraud, our whole business is going to go away. So it wasn't for any legal reason that we did this. It was more from a business reason. And so the reason why we also wanted to pay attention to this is because we were the only platform, and we still are, that has launched to create a total equal opportunity. So what that means is we don't pick and choose projects that come on our site. We don't vet. We don't curate. I know it's a scary word. People are like, then how do you have all this not crazy people on your site? The reason why we are equal opportunity and open like that is, again, it goes back to our belief and our values and our mission, which is to empower the world to fund what matters to them. And we did not believe it was our right to decide who has the right to raise money and who doesn't. That said, because we were open, that meant two things. One, we needed to actually build a meritocratic system where the projects that do gain as much community validation and are working hard actually rise to the top. We developed an algorithm called the GOGA factor that does that. It's similar to Google's PageRank. So the harder you work and the more your community responds to you, which we think are the only two reasons that should determine your success, the higher your GOGA factor, and the higher your GOGA factor, the more placement you have on our homepage and higher up in our browse pages. It gets into our newsletter and all of our PR and social media. So it's very much earned, and it's very meritocratic. That's how we've handled being open and being fair in the promotion side. On the fraud side, when you're open, you are at risk for people trying to use the platform the way it wasn't intended. So what we did is we paid very close attention to what was going on our site, and we developed algorithms to catch fraud and shut them down before anything could actually happen. So there's 3 ways that crowdfunding portals or platforms like us, I think, should be fighting fraud. And the first is, well, we're lucky that just the nature of crowdfunding is a natural deterrent unto itself because of the one-to-many relationship. I would argue it's harder to convince hundreds or thousands of people to give you $10 than it is to walk into a bank and defraud one bank lender. And so just the nature of the crowd makes it harder to, quote, steal a bunch of money from a lot of people. The second is we have built these algorithms that take advantage of the fact that we are a data-driven site. We know everything that's going on, and we can actually suss out fraudulent activity pretty quickly. And because we have the one-to-many relationship, we're probably even more secure than, say, like a PayPal or eBay, where there's only a one-to-one relationship happening in the transaction. And then the third way we fight, this is a good time.
I don't think that means time's up.
And the third way is self-policing. Similar to eBay, we use your community to catch stuff. So the whole point, though, is we've been fighting fraud for 5 years, so it's not a new problem. This is exciting.
May I have your attention, please? Our hotel response team is investigating the alarm that is sounding. Please remain calm. We will notify you with further instructions. Thank you.
Oh.
Well, until they...
May I have your attention, please? The hotel response team is investigating the alarm that is sounding. Please remain calm. We will notify you with all further instructions. Thank you.
Well, until they notify us, I think we'll continue here. Did you want to finish your comments today?
The third reason was similar to PayPal and eBay. We use a self-policing system, so we have our community that we rely on too as a third layer to help suss out anything irregular. But the key is the algorithms, and that's something that we're continually refining. Big data is all the rage now. We've got machine learning going on, so we're actually building kind of this lockbox that we're now getting interest from, like, traditional financiers, and we expect one day for them to say, hey, can we run all of our investments through your little system to make sure we're not dealing with anybody bad. But again, we did it out of need because we wanted a safe site. It was a business need. It was not any kind of legal framework, and that would be my recommendation, or that's my hope, is that the SEC and the regulations come out in such a way that platforms like us can continue to innovate and actually probably fight fraud better than ever before. In any manual system.
So it sounds, it sounds like a self-policing mechanism, or almost like an eBay model as applied to crowdfunding portals. Mm-hmm. But Ben, I want to turn to you. I know you have some interesting overall thoughts on fraud, and I also want to flip the question a little bit too, and have you talk about risks to the entrepreneur. I mean, you have now hundreds of investors, so what are the risks to entrepreneurs that we should think about? Yeah,
it's funny because the real estate industry is very opaque. Usually you walk around your neighborhood, you don't know who owns your neighborhood, you don't know who profits from the places you go to, and it's definitely not anybody you know. So that's a very strange notion. And when I talk to real estate guys about actually flipping that and creating basically a co-investment for local people, a lot of real estate guys find that crazy, basically. That sounds very scary to them. What about administration? How do you deal with all these people? And so I had to do it first for my own real estate, and I have hundreds of investors, and I sent out hundreds of K1s on March 1st, right? So to a $100 investor, so somebody invested $100, he got a K1. How many $100 investors knew what a K1 was? I mean, basically I would say almost none of them. So we had our customer service engine ready. We were ready for all these questions. We had all sorts of reports prepared to basically explain people how to do this, and we got one email, and the woman said, well, I already filed my taxes, what should I do? And so it shows basically a level of sophistication. The administration for having hundreds of investors, we've found, is the same as having one. We have seen almost no administrative issues here, and I think it's because when I talk to people and I say, okay, you have a 401k and you have investments, how often do you actually think about them? How often do you call your broker? You don't. So when you invest in a real estate, basically we haven't seen an administrative problem. What I've seen actually is the opposite. The communities drives the investment. I didn't expect this. I sort of hoped for it, but they're bringing me tenants. They email the city council member. They email the permit office. I mean, they want to drive that investment. And as a real estate guy, capital is a commodity at this point. I can raise money from lots of financial institutions. what is the difference? The difference is how can they drive my investment? And I've found that I have a number of deals that are $100 million deals. A $100 million deal, one in Santa Monica, I've like a half dozen in Washington, D.C. We're only going to bring a few $1 million to that deal, but it'll be a few thousand people. And what the developers want, they want the few thousand people, because there's an asymmetry. $100 million to institutional guys in this room, that's maybe a normal amount of money. Maybe it's small for some of you. $1 million is not a lot of money. But for the public, $1 million, $2 million is a lot. That sounds like a lot of money. So there's an asymmetry where you get incredible social equity by having people in your deal. In real estate, 10 people can stop a real estate development. 100 people can kill it. 1,000 people can invest in it, can transform what's possible. Zoning, density, design. So it's really the opposite. It's like Wikipedia, the opposite of what you'd expect. The crowd actually is a huge asset. It's not a liability.
Interesting. So Nivi, let me turn to you. In the Title II space, when we're dealing with accredited investors in Reg D, there are overall far fewer disclosure requirements that are built into the system. What has been the experience of AngelList so far? What have you seen in the marketplace that you've created? Are there high incidence of fraud, low incidence, and how will that inform what happens when Title II is implemented and we lift this ban on general solicitation?
Sure. On our platform, I'm not aware of any fraud, which is good. The way we deal with that in terms of if you want to invest online in any startup on AngelList, the only way you can do that is if you're co-investing with what we call a top-tier investor. Basically, the startup already has a top-tier investor in the deal, and that investor has met the company and set the terms, and you're getting the same exact terms. So it's a pretty simple fraud prevention mechanism. If you're a startup, you have to have a good investor in the deal. They've met you, they set the terms, and you, as an AngelList investor, you get to co-invest with that guy. So that's pretty straightforward for us. But like I said, we don't have any fraud, which is nice. Just one thing to be aware of in, I guess, the Title III space, which will let non-accredited investors invest in startups for equity.
And debt.
And debt. I'm sorry, my worldview is very narrow, so excuse me, I'm sorry. It seems like the officers and the directors of the company may be personally liable for fraud, and you tell me if...
Right now, they are still trying to figure out what kind of liability regime. For those of you who are familiar with 12A2 liability, it looks like crowdfunding will resemble that. So, yes.
Right. So, just for our particular case, that would be a big issue for us, because it's unlikely that any good startup, which we're focused on helping high-tech companies that can change or save the world get funded, it's unlikely that they're going to want to subject themselves to that, because they have other sources of capital available to them on AngelList through accredited investors or off of AngelList through accredited investors.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, that's a key question. And what I'm hearing from you and also from Ben is it sounds like what a lot of the portals are trying to do is couple the crowd with traditional investors. And if you do that, you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. There's some of the due diligence and expertise provided by the lead investors, and then you're getting kind of product or project validation from the crowd. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. What I want to do now, I want to leave a couple minutes here for some questions at the end. So we're going to do a rapid fire round where I'm going to ask a question, try to answer me in 30 seconds or less if you can. So here's your opportunity. What one thing can regulators do to maximize the potential of crowdfunding? I'll start with Danae.
Well, can I do a quick thing on the point you just made?
Absolutely.
Or is that breaking
Go ahead.
rules? Okay.
I'll take up part of your 30 seconds.
I'll take it. Okay, real quick. Just a good example of I fundamentally believe crowdfunding is creating this incredible incubation platform, and it's making the entire financial ecosystem stronger because it's allowing these projects to bubble up to the top, and traditional gatekeepers and investors now can have rely less on guesswork in trying to find that next entrepreneur, and actually use market validation from crowdfunding as a way to find the next big entrepreneur. And a great example example was the guy who raised money for his activity tracker called The Shine. He'd actually raised some venture capital, but then decided to do crowdfunding to get smarter faster, and he learned in his pricing that people were willing to buy the black version better than the silver version, pay more for the black version stuff. So he actually learned a lot more about the product before actually launching, and going forward he will never not do a crowdfunding campaign in conjunction with venture capital to actually launch. But what could the I think just over-regulation in general is going to stifle innovation. Like, the reason we came up with fraud algorithms is because we wanted to stay in business. If they tell us that you have to hire people to review every single campaign that wants to go live and raise money via equity, like a human being has to do that, that's fundamentally, we're not going to do equity crowdfunding, because that's ridiculous, not scalable, and completely prone to error, and actually puts us at greater risk of greater liability, because human beings individually make more mistakes than data. So that would be my number one thing, and I'll shut up because that's over 30 seconds.
All right, Nivi, go ahead.
I think if they move forward with implementing the Jobs Act soon would be great. I'm not complaining if anyone from the SEC is watching, but from my perspective, at least insofar as it affects us, almost none of it seems to be implemented. So that would be great. And then I think the Jobs Act was actually a great model for, I don't know if collaboration is the right word, but between the SEC and Congress and startups. So any further regulations or iterations on it would be nice if that kind of collaboration happened again.
Ben?
I would say just to get it out the door and set up together a blue ribbon commission to come back to it a year or two from now and look at empirical evidence rather than the theoretical fears of what's going to happen. Do something and then see what the market how a market responds, and then come back to it and reevaluate. That's how any business would do it, and so I think the government should try that as well.
Candace?
Okay, I know this is being videotaped. So, Chairman Mary Jo White, this message is for you. You have got the draft rules on your desk. You've had them since November the 1st. I know you didn't, but that desk has had them since November the 1st. I would strongly encourage the 5 commissioners to move forward with calling public comment on Title III. They've had the rules drafted from the staff for a very long period of time at this point, and the only thing stopping us from moving forward is the public comment period. Now, that's just for Title III. Now, specifically related to Title III, the 2 things that I think need to be fixed. This is for Congressman McHenry, Senator Merkley, any of the congressional members who are listening. First is the 21-day cool-off period does not work for debt. Most debt deals in other countries are being closed in 2 to 3 days. The 21-day cool-off period does not work in a debt scenario. The second piece is tied to investment advice. The Indiegogo factor, I love it, doesn't work, unfortunately, under the current Jobs Act, because that's being seen as picking the winners, and anything that pushes deals to the front right now is being seen as picking the winners and offering some forms of investment advice. I love it. You should be able to do it. I think Congress needs to make some changes.
Great. Chris?
I agree entirely that the investment advice issue is a problem, that ultimately what you're going to end up with is an entirely accredited investor space if you don't make some key changes. I would, though, want to just offer one defense of the SEC for a variety of reasons. There have been over and in the past, many people have said we can do it ourselves and we don't need regulation, and there have been various times in history where that was not too helpful. I think that a good, strong, smart, self-regulatory process is the way to move forward and to empower the industry working with Congress and with regulators to expeditiously come up with and implement the Jobs Act.
All right, thank you, Chris. We have a few minutes here, so we can take a couple of questions, and then hopefully you can speak to some of the panelists after the discussion. I'll start right here in the front. Ian, go ahead.
Yes. So I'm with a boutique broker-dealer, and we work with a lot of unusual deals where there's
We'll repeat.
a good part of sort of more public interest. We would love to work with a crowdfunding platform in conjunction with what we already do as a traditional broker-dealer to raise money for some of these kind of startups and ventures. How do you see your platforms working with traditional broker-dealers in this fashion, if at all?
Candace, you want to start?
Yeah,
If you can repeat the question.
Yes,
too.
for those of you in the audience who are broker-dealers wanting to work with crowdfunding platforms, guess what? There are plenty of options. The question was, how do we as a broker-dealer work in the crowdfunding space with a crowdfunding portal? Is that okay? So there's a report that comes out once a year by Massolution. It's called. You can get it at crowdsourcing.org. Crowdsourcing.org has an inventory of every single crowdfunding platform in the United States that's active today, broken down by niche, the types of deals they're doing. If you're a broker-dealer, I strongly encourage you to spend the $500 for that report, and start to look through platforms that meet your mission as a broker-dealer. We have a broker-dealer partner. I believe that I don't know if you guys do. But we've already kind of put our partnership in place, but there are a lot of platforms who are actively seeking broker-dealer partners right now.
I see another question here in the front row.
My question to the panel is, do you use crowdfunding for your own business to grow?
We at SomoLend, we've raised $2.2 million for our platform on our platform. So we have eaten our dog food, yes.
And actually, I'll let Ben also answer this, because you're a vertically integrated site. You might want to explain what that meant.
We own the real estate and we also own the platform, and we're funding our own real estate with our platform, which is how we basically were able to do it originally as an issuer offer agent. We have not crowdfunded Fundrise on Fundrise, because Fundrise is really a real estate investment platform, and Fundrise is really a technology company. So it would actually be, I think, a confusion of offering to fund our company on our own platform.
I'll take the third row here.
Okay.
What do you do? What's your response when you detect that?
What's our response? It's a lot of it's automated.
Just the question is, what is the response when you detect fraud on the platform?
Right. There's a couple different types of fraud potentially, and so we have a system that automatically shuts down fraud or freezes campaigns and sends alerts to the people involved and opens up a dialogue if needed. But most fraudsters, if they were originally intending to try to commit fraud, by our system kind of shutting it down, it makes it harder to do, and they just flee. So we actually, if there was any kind of credit card contributions that had happened, it instantly gets reversed, and typically we catch it before the credit card payment actually even settles.
Okay, I'm going to go a little further back, ma'am. And there's a microphone coming your way, actually.
Hi, could we hear a little bit about return expectations and successes?
Sure. Sure. So on Indiegogo, we have everything from entrepreneurs to causes to artists. So I don't know if you remember the Karen Klein bus monitor. Last year, she got bullied on a bus, and a kid caught a video of it, and it went viral. And somebody in Canada saw it and was so disturbed. He said, "I have to do something about this and send this woman on a vacation." So he went on Indiegogo, instantly got a campaign up to raise $5,000, ended up raising $700,000 from people across 60 countries of the world. So that's a great example. The woman actually went on vacation. She was very excited, bought a new rug, and then actually gave most of the money to anti-bullying causes and charities herself. But then we have small businesses like, one of my favorites is actually Samantha, who started her own bakery business. She was actually up on stage with President Obama when he signed the Jobs Act, which was really exciting because she was a young entrepreneur. She had taken out a small business loan to start a bakery business. It was a gluten-free bakery business. I think she brought about $10,000. She was literally making baked goods out of her garage and had the opportunity to expand into a regional grocery store chain. But the one problem is that she had to actually update her packaging, which was going to cost $15,000. So as a young small business, it's not like you have $15,000 working capital sitting next to you. So instead, she went back to the bank to get another loan, and they said, "Congrats on the opportunity. There's no way in hell we're lending you that money. You're far too young, too high risk. You haven't even paid back your first loan." So rather than wait 2 years to build up traction, she said, "Screw that. I'm just going to crowdfund this." And in 3 weeks, she pre-sold macaroons, or pre-offered macaroons in exchange for contributions, raised the $15,000. Within a month, was in the grocery store, and within 6 months, she was distributing her product across 40 states in America. And then a few months later, she was up on stage with President Obama, and she'd hired people and was growing. So that's an incredible story of how just a little bit of money, which, $15,000 for most of us in this room is not a lot, that made her entire her life and her business.
I think we are questioning.
Candace, unfortunately, we are out of time. But I want to thank all of you for joining us. Thank all of our panelists. And hopefully we've satisfied our goal. Hopefully you understand a little bit more about securities crowdfunding and the potential impact. So we appreciate it.